This week, I'm delighted to be speaking with Heinz Richardson. Heinz is a very well-known architect and for over 30 years was a director of Jestico Whiles, who are a fantastic practice if you don't know. We'll be talking about sustainable development, climate change, social justice, some of the massive problems in the planning system currently and historically. We'll be talking about how important collaboration is and how developers and architects really need to work together in the right way to get the best places created. Thanks for coming, Heinz.
Absolute pleasure. I'm delighted to be here and to meet you and have a conversation with you and to see this amazing development that you've done. Absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
We'll talk about that in a while, I'm sure.
We might. So, tell me where did it all begin for you?
Becoming an architect?
Yeah, everything.
Wow. Okay. Well, it started for me in Germany. I was born in Germany, in Bavaria, hence the sort of slightly odd Christian name of Heinz. And my surname is Richardson. I had an English stepfather. I came to England when I was 4. And I remember we lived in North Yorkshire on a farm. So I was, always in the landscape and on a farm. It was pretty tough, We lived in a tied cottage. It was cold, damp, and the winters were very harsh. But I used to cycle, as soon as I could cycle, to a primary school that was probably about 2 or 3 miles away. And I had the most amazing headmistress. And I was always interested in making things and drawing, There was always a sort of village show and you could enter a picture or whatever. So I did a lot of that. Anyway, when I left that primary school, the headmistress, absolute brilliant lady, said to me, she gave me a book and she said, you might be interested in this. And it was this book of architecture. I don't know if you know the Observer's books. They get Observer's Book of Birds, Trains, whatever, It was the Observer's Book of Architecture. And she said, do you know what an architect is? I said, no. She said, well, read this, take it as a leaving gift. Because I was moving to just outside Chesham, not very far from here. And because of my mother's health, that's a long story. But anyway, she gave me this book and I read it and I was immediately fascinated. So I then went to secondary school
So just out of interest, how old were you then when she gave you the book?
When I left primary school, I had to do the 11 plus and luckily I passed the 11 plus and I, went then to a grammar school, and the nearest grammar school to where we lived when we moved down south was Dr. Challoner's Grammar School, so I went there.
Yeah. And then still very good.
It's fantastic. I've got a long association with it. I played cricket for Old Challoner's for years and years. It's another story. But during my time at the school, I sort of thought I'd like to become an architect, and having sort of had my interest aroused through the book. I went to see lots of churches and things like that were around here. I got interested in all the, the history of architecture and so on. And I had a fantastic art. There were sort of 2 people, my primary school headmistress and my art teacher, and my maths teacher, but my art teacher primarily at secondary school, had trained to be an architect at Liverpool School of Architecture. Didn't like it, didn't fancy it, went to become an art teacher. But he was such an inspiring man, and he could see potential in people. He was a teacher that nurtured you and brought out what you wanted to express through art and things like that. And I was always very good at art. So I took art A-level and I took maths and physics, which were the subjects that you're supposed to do. And then applied to university, and I went to University College London, to the Bartlett, as it was. It still is, one of the best schools in the country. Yeah. And then, did my first part of, did the degree, which is part 1 in architecture training. You have to then do part 2, and then you have to do your professional practice. I did that. When I graduated,
So what year would that have been?
That would have been so I would have graduated in 1972. And then I finally became an architect in 75, 76. I took 2 years out, because you have to then do a year out in industry and all the rest of it. And I remember when I left architecture school to try and get a job was virtually impossible. Because we were in the middle of the oil crisis.
73,
the 3-day week, you know, the lights were going out. And I'd always been interested in the impact of the environment on people's lives and how architecture could influence it, you know, the importance of place, the importance of light and shade and shelter and all of those things. And I suddenly got interested in natural resources because I discovered that during my lifetime, back then, it was predicted that certain of our fossil fuels would run out, certain of our minerals, aluminium, would run out, and we would be faced with a dilemma. Of course, what happened was that, you know, the exploration and drilling for oil and gas then became possible in places that were until then unreachable. So technology was advancing and we could sustain ourselves, but the warning signs were already there, you know. So I became very interested in several aspects of our architecture. Firstly, the social aspect of it, how important it was for people, and how, you know, as architects we were making decisions that would impact on people's lives. Also, how, you know, the sort of social agenda as well. During my time at university, I was part of a group that squatted a building that was about to be demolished in a place called Tolmer's Village. Because do you know the Euston Road? The Euston Road is very wide, and when it gets to Euston, it narrows down to one lane. And the reason it narrows down to one lane is because the original plan to widen the Euston Road and make it a thoroughfare all the way through, you know, 2 lanes, was scuppered by a group of students that squatted some buildings and said, hang on, what about homes for people? What about a community? You're going to destroy there was a fantastic, you know, Drummond Street and all of the wonderful restaurants and shops around there. As a thriving community, and it was just going to be bulldozed. So it was kind of the first sort of time I got into the sort of politics around architecture and how you could, you know, make a change through what you were doing. So those 2 things, so understanding the environment and understanding the social power behind creating buildings and architecture and places, suddenly were sort of driving forces for me. And I then carried on, qualified, and I always wanted to work not for a high-end kind of commercial architect, but for somebody who actually cared about architecture with a capital A, actually, you know, the beauty of buildings, the power of space, the power of light, the tactility of it all. But also had a sort of a social aspect to it. You know, we're doing really well-considered buildings that thought about the people that were going to use them, the materials they were going to be made out of, the beauty behind the design that you know you could come up with, and also the agenda and the care and all the rest of it. So that's sort of my career path then went through.
So who was that? Who did you first work for?
Well, I worked for a practice called Shepherd Robson.
I know them.
In Camden Town. Yeah, I did my professional practice
Still around?
there. Yeah, they were great. You know, they'd done schools and housing, and then the two sort of founding partners, Richard Shepherd and Geoffrey Robson, retired, and the next generation sort of take over, and it became a bit more commercial. I mean, I loved the schools and I loved the housing, the social housing as it was then, you know, that they were doing. And I needed to get my Part 3, so I enjoyed it there. It was a fantastic office to work in Camden Town. I mean, I lived just north of Camden Town, in not far from Tufnell Park, in a house share with some friends. But I had a good friend who was in the music business, and there was a record. I mean, we can carry on talking about this forever. But there was a record shop in Camden Town that was called Chiswick Records, and they supported kind of independent bands that were coming through. So I kind of got into that scene peripherally and engaged with it. And all the gigs that I went to were around Camden Town and Islington, and then some places in Hammersmith, and the 100 Club, the Marquee Club. They were all great. So I suddenly got into the whole spirit of London as it was evolving back in the sort of late 70s, early 80s. And I loved London. I loved the energy. I loved the sort of, architecture was changing. There were, if I look back on London then and London now, I mean, the City of London had probably no tall buildings, and the first one to come along was the NatWest Tower, as it was. And now, there's a cluster of them. I mean, it's massive. But it was, there was so much, and being at the Bartlett as well, in the early days of my education at the Bartlett, the School of Architecture was next to the Slade School of Art. And Slade was very famous. I mean, fantastic, And we used to have a connecting door, and I used to go in there and join the sketching classes, the life sketching class. I mean, but they always had fantastic end-of-year shows. And, it was a time of experimentation. It was a time of some social change, the 70s, the explosion of kind of street and urban culture was affecting everything. And there were two paths you could go down, like the Led Zeppelin song. You can either go into the commercial world and join that, or you could seek out people who were interested in doing things that were, firstly, thoughtful, secondly, beautifully crafted and considered, and thirdly, fantastic places for people to inhabit and occupy and be in. And that's the one I chose, really. So then I joined. I kind of had a period where I sort of was trying to set up my own practice with a couple of other guys, which we sort of did for a bit, and had a good time. But we sort of ran out of work, and we had a few clients that didn't pay, and you couldn't really sue them because they didn't exist, because they had £100 companies, and so we were just left. Enthusiastic young men, doing a great job, believing that you were going to get paid, and when you don't, you go, well, that's outrageous. But you learn a harsh lesson very early on. So I then, I just bought a flat near Parliament Hill, and I had no money and all the rest of it. So I freelanced a bit, and then a friend of mine rang me up and said that he worked at Jestico Whiles, and he said, we're looking for people to come and help us on a competition that we're doing, and it was in Docklands, because the LDDC had been established by Michael Heseltine, and it was a planning-free area, and the competition was for a developer called Kentish Homes, who were based in St Albans, and it was the site that the competition was for was called Burrell's Wharf. And Burrell's Wharf, in its latter years, was a paint factory, but in its heyday, it had been built for the construction of the Great Eastern by Brunel. And so it had this fantastic history, and they'd acquired it, and they wanted to build it. So we won the competition, and everything was going well. Built up a big team of people. There was no computers back there. Everything was hand drawn. We worked through the night and long hours as one does. And when was it? My first daughter was born in 1987 on the 19th of October, which was Black Monday. I was in University College Hospital with my wife Jenny, and our birth of our daughter Zoe. And when I came out, it was fantastic, experience and life changing and all of that, as one would expect. I read the Evening Standard headlines, and there was a massive property crash. It was just, Black Monday had happened, as it was called, because she was born on a Monday. And that then impacted on everything that was going on, because it was, it was until then unfettered. People were, we designed the scheme, we built, a show building that had different types of flats in it that were constructed. People were queuing up to buy them, Estate agents were, were buying Porsches at the end of the week's sales because they'd sold so many. And people were selling flats as soon as they bought them to somebody else.
Yeah,
I remember. You must have,
I just started out. I was just doing a few little smallish bits and pieces there, but I definitely remember when it all went tits up very quickly.
It went very quickly, and overnight, things changed dramatically, because what was happening was that property was being exchanged like a commodity. Like you were trading in stocks and shares or something. And so there was no true value behind it. And that then caused an overheating of everything, and bang, it went.
Just a quick word to say thank you to our sponsors, LandTech, creators of Land Insight, which is the industry-leading bit of software to help developers find and analyse the potential of real 100% off-market development opportunities. I've been involved in the business for over 10 years now, and if you don't know what it basically does what people like me used to have to do the old-fashioned way, which is hunt around and get together all of the key information that's needed in order to make sensible decisions on the development potential of land. So that's planning data, market research, lists of all of the various constraints, environment and agency information, you name it, massive long list of all of the stuff that you need in order to find out who owns land, what policy constraints there might be, and exactly what you may or may not be able to do with it. All of the industry leading developers use it, and also the most clued up smaller ones. So if you're not already using it and you want to trial for yourself, have a look in the show notes. You'll find a link to get a free trial, test it for yourself, see what you think, and hopefully get busy finding real off-market development opportunities. So thanks again to our show sponsors, LandTech, and let's get back to the show.
Well, the impact on the project was that it was immediately stopped. The client was in financial difficulty. They sold a lot of their properties abroad, and a receiver was appointed by the Halifax Building Society, who had lent the money to the developer, Kentish Homes, to develop it. A receiver was appointed to deal with the outfall. And that was one of the most salutary experiences of my life, was, John Whiles and I went in to see the receiver, who had the power to... His opening line was, yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. I have the power to either continue with this project, which has been profligate and beset with problems, or push it all into the Thames. I will make a decision.
Wow.
Now, you might, think that you are going to continue. I'm not sure whether we will continue with an architect or what we'll do. So we had to present our case. We were owed a lot of money, and we had to negotiate with this guy who was a complete bastard.
Yeah.
I mean, he was really a nasty piece of work.
Sounds it,
because he had all the power, and he could, you could see him playing with the power that he had over these poor, weak architects. Well, actually, we were quite smart. That's another long story. Anyway, cut a long story short, we continued. We built out part of the scheme. We struggled as a practice. We went through some tough times, and we kind of survived by hook or by crook. One of the things that John was always very much promoting was to always look at an opportunity. Never get stuck in a rut, and try and look at other opportunities. And we did, and we got other work, and we sort of struggled through, and then it started getting better again. So I spent all of my serious bit of my career really with Jestico Whiles, and we had a building in Euston that they had bought, which.
So how long was that in the end? How long? I know it's a long time. How long were you with Jestico Whiles?
33 years. 33 years. I stepped down in 2020, so that was sort of when the pandemic had arrived.
Yeah.
Although I made the decision before the pandemic really took hold. I was 67 at the time, and I thought, probably a good time to go. Let the younger members of the practice, make it their thing. Because we had become, it was very interesting because we become an employee-owned trust, or it was an employees' benefit trust in 2002.
Oh, in 2002
so,
that happened?
Yeah, as a model of practice, we were way ahead of the curve. I mean, everybody's doing it now, so that all the directors of practice can realise the value of what they've built up. We anticipated that back, at the turn of the millennium, and so we established an employee benefit trust. So what happened was there were sort of a number of shareholders. I was one, and we transferred the shares into the trust over a period of time, and the practice then paid us for the value of those shares, but it wasn't an immediate hit. So it was a much more sustainable way of doing it. So we carried on working there, but suddenly there was, nobody had any shares in the practice, so there was no ownership. The ownership was the employees, and at any point in time, and that has continued. And so it made, and it was also to deal with succession. How do you deal with succession in an organisation where you've got a number of, leaders and figureheads that have built it up, and suddenly they're thinking, what happens now? Selling your shares to a younger member of the practice is pretty much impossible. Architectural practice are not worth anything other than the intellectual capacity and their clients, and maybe they have a building somewhere that's of interest, but it's their client base. And so, to value the shares in a practice like that at something that has its true worth for the all the times you've made sacrifices is an interesting conundrum. And like I say, you can't sell it to young. They don't earn anything. Younger guys don't earn anything. Guys and gals and whatever, they don't earn anything, so they're not going to buy it. They got mortgages and all the rest of it. So we thought this is just not a sustainable way of doing it. So that's why we established the Employee Benefit Trust, and we operated a fantastic, absolutely ultra fair profit share system, bonus system really, but profit share. We would always identify an amount to share, and we would score everybody. We had a scoring. John Whiles devised this fantastic scoring system that was brilliant. It measured people's contribution to the practice in 10 different fields, like your contribution to design, your contribution to technical advancement, how much you contribute to promoting the practice, what sort of person you are within the practice, how you encourage learning and advancement and all of those. And we scored everybody in their various spans, year outs, architects, so on and so forth, up to directors, and it worked exceptionally well. It was fantastic. So it meant that somebody worked really hard one year, but then sort of had other issues another year and couldn't put as much time in or whatever. You could reward them, differently.
Yeah.
Whereas if you increase people's salaries, that's a fixed thing, and it doesn't always reflect. The problem with some organisations is you have a lot of older people within it that have been there for years, that are commanding huge salaries, but actually, are not the sort of powerhouse behind the organisation and the practice. And so to sort of try and reward people fairly according to their effort, input, commitment, all of those words, was a good thing. It worked exceptionally well. So So when the founding directors and I and others retired or stepped away, there's no, like, here's my shares, make me an offer. You just leave like anybody else.
Yeah,
That's brilliant. It's brilliant.
So what were some of your best schemes then over the years? Because I remember I did try to do some stuff with you guys a couple of times, and for whatever reason, the schemes, you know, I think it might have been stuff I was bidding for and it just never came off. So we never managed to do anything.
We did a lot of that. We did a lot of bidding. I mean, that's the bane of every architect's life. I mean, architects up and down the land will tell you how much time and money and effort they put into trying to win work. And you know, you can only do so much of it unless you have a pot of gold that you can, you know, turn to. You'll go quickly bust if you're, you know, and people used to take the mickey. They you know, you'd sort of get a sniff of a project from a developer, a big developer, and they say, oh, could you just do us a quick, you know, feasibility for this? And you'd work all weekend, you'd knock something brilliant out, and then they wouldn't even bid for the site. You know, they go, oh yeah, well, you know, you ring them up, say, what happened to the thing? Say, oh, we didn't bid for the site because it didn't stack up. And you go, right, okay, and then they do it again and again. And after a while, you just have to say, well, look, hang on, we can't sustain this. We're going to have to, you know, we're going to have to charge you. And what happens then is they just go to somebody else.
Go to the next one.
So, you know, it's a sort of, it's a difficult path to tread. But in terms of your question, what are some of the best schemes? I mean, Burrell's Wharf, as it was then, was a really good scheme. It was a nice scheme. It had historic buildings that were sensitively restored. We had what we called international quality flats that were sold abroad, you know, on the riverfront. And then we had warehouse loft apartments that sort of reproduced the kind of Boston lofts that were very popular in America. So it was really out there, you know, in terms of stuff. But I've done so many schemes during my time there that which ones am I most proud of? I mean, there was a project that we did, which was a little competition that was held just before the millennium by the Museum of Welsh Life. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Museum of Welsh Life.
No.
A place called St Fagans, just outside Cardiff, it's a bit like, actually, it's a bit like the Chiltern Open Air Museum. It's not a, you know, stone's throw from here. They have a history of Welsh life through architecture, so buildings. So they have, you know, small cottages that were built and miners' cottages, little terrace of houses. So you can wander around that and you can see a history of Welsh life through architecture and through the buildings, you know, little chapels and things like that. And anyway, they had this notion that they have lots of things that represent the past, but nothing that represents the future. So they decided to have a competition, and BBC Wales sponsored them, helped them with it, and the Museum of Welsh Life were the client. And they issued a brief to architects to design a house for the future. Now, it's very important. It wasn't a house of the future, so, you know, futuristic, kind of like, where's technology going, but a house for the future, which is what we interpreted as being the important thing. So what would a house for the future need to be? Anyway, a group of us got together and we entered a competition, and we were lucky enough to win, which was great. You know, it's fantastic. We designed this house, and we made it about flexibility, adaptability, sustainability, and replication, that you could replicate it. So it was based on a sort of module. But we gave ourselves, and it was then going to be built by a contractor called Redrow. Steve Morgan, who was the MD of Redrow, or the owner of Redrow, he was born in Wales, I think, and knew of it and supported.
Bricklayer.
Yeah, that's right, and supported the whole thing. So Redrow were the contractor, and we were building this experimental house, and they identified a housing association family to test drive it, to live in it for a week.
What was it? How many beds? What size?
This particular house happened to have 2 beds, 2/3 bedrooms, but the module could be sort of expanded and contracted. And we made our sort of bid on the basis of trying to find all the materials for the house from within 25 miles of the site. If we couldn't find them within 25 miles, we went to 50 miles, 100 miles, and so on. So we had these concentric circles, and we tried to reduce the embodied energy in transportation. The energy taken.
I think I told you I tried doing that here.
Yeah, it was tricky. It was actually quite tricky, but we were lucky because the house had an oak frame, and it was rendered and clad in timber, so we could get the render locally. We could get it was lime render. So we made building blocks because we wanted a lot of thermal mass in the house. I'm a great believer in thermal mass being a modulator of internal temperature. It just works well. It's not sort of like a insulated box that heats up and cools down quickly. If you go into a cathedral, it's always the same temperature, whether it's winter or summer. It's always cool. So it's the thermal mass that works for that. We had an ecology, a bio roof. We harvested rainwater, but we made building blocks for the thermal mass out of compressed earth that we dug up from the site, and we tested them. We got the University of Bangor to test their compressive strength, and they were quite strong. But we built walls out of them, and then we covered the walls with clay plaster, not gypsum plaster, but clay plaster, which is much more benign and much better for your health. Now this was it opened in 2000 because it was a Millennium Project. So this was, what are we talking about, 25 years ago when we first designed it and thought about it. So it's a quarter of a century, We had a heat pump, a ground source heat pump to heat it, We had high levels of sheep's wool insulation. There was a farm next door that had sheep, so we harvested the sheep. Unfortunately, there was nowhere in the UK that would treat the fleeces, because you have to treat sheep's wool insulation to kill all the little organisms that live in it. And that can only be done. There was just nowhere here. Anyway, we had to send it to Germany, and it was kind of a success story. And the British Wool Marketing Board then took an interest in this and established a sheep's wool manufacturing plant in somewhere up north in Bradford or somewhere. And now you can get sheep's wool commercially. You couldn't then. It was impossible. So it had all those wonderful aspects, and on all the rest. Oh yes, we made a kitchen from recycled components. We did all the things that you would be talking about now as being sustainable. So there was a great, and the BBC made a 3-part program out of it. And the first bit was about the design, second bit about the construction, and the third bit was the family. It was a young mum with her 3 kids that lived in it for a week, and they quite liked it.
Very good. And so that got built and it's still there?
Well, I don't know whether it's still there. I mean, it sort of loses its point after 25 years. It's no longer for the future. So it sort of had lots of people visited it. I had loads of visitors. It opened people's eyes to the sorts of things that, people need to be aware of, that we've talked about, sustainability, the importance of landscape. I mean, we had a biophilic landscape. We made a globe of glass, and inside it we put some basic organisms of life to see if they would sustain themselves. And they lasted about a year and then died because they had they couldn't sustain life. So it was an interesting experimental project. So that for me was kind of interesting. I've done lots of other very, very sustainable projects. There's one not a million miles away in Beaconsfield. We worked for a housing association that was specialised in housing older people.
Right.
They were called Housing 21, and they wanted a new headquarters building in Beaconsfield, which is still there, near the roundabout as you come in, near it's either Waitrose or Sainsbury's, not far from the station. It's on a triangular site.
Yeah, I know it, yeah.
And we built a naturally ventilated office that was cool in summer and warm in winter. And it was naturally ventilated. I mean, there were lots and lots of, pioneering architects looking at, natural ventilation as opposed to air conditioning. There's a wonderful building at the BRE by Field and Clegg for firemen, that had, ventilation chimneys. I was really in time, and I got really quite deep into the subject and had a specialist knowledge. And so, we were pioneering that work, and I was lecturing around the world on sustainability. I famously went to a conference in Florence to talk about a zero energy office building that we designed and other sustainable projects. And I was in this massive, sort of hall full of people from around Europe mostly, but all over the place, and a lot of Italian people. And you had to give your slide, because we had slides then. There was no, PowerPoints or anything. It was slides with projectors. And I had 2 carousels, and they were dispatched up to the gods where there was a projection room. Anyway, I was about to give my talk, and they, projected the first slides, and they weren't my slides. So, I was mic'd up, and there was simultaneous translation going on, so people could hear it. So I didn't know what to do. I was like, kind of thing. So I started sort of just talking to people. I remember talking to them about football, because it's a universal passion, and I'm a supporter of Chelsea, and for my sins. But they had just reached one of the finals or whatever. So I started, and they had a lot of Italians in their team. So I started talking about, how great it was, that Italian football. Anyway, it worked well. Anyway, eventually they got the right slides. So I was about half an hour delayed. When the slides came on, I went through, did my talk. And then towards the end of the talk, the place started filling up, people were coming in. And I thought, this is interesting, why are all these people coming in? And then I suddenly realized, because the next guy to talk, sort of keynote address, was Richard Rogers.
Oh, wow.
So they were all coming in to hear him. So I got to talk to them all. Anyway, and then another funny thing happened. It was brilliant, because Richard came on, and I listened to and he was talking about, a lot of sustainable issues and all the rest of it to do with city planning and all and that kind of thing. Because he was supported by the Labour Party then to, look at how we could make our cities more sustainable and all the rest of it. And everybody was plugged in, all the Italian guys, and suddenly he delivered his whole presentation in Italian.
Wow.
Because he's got Italian background, so he delivered it in Italian. So suddenly everybody was kind of like, what was he saying? What's he saying? It was an amusing moment, but really, really memorable for many reasons.
It's interesting. So just in terms of the whole sustainability thing, because, obviously it's massively important, and it's sort of goes up and down, it seems to me, in terms of peak of interest and, God, I remember, I'm sure you remember Code for Sustainable Homes and stuff like that. There was a big push for that, and then it disappeared, and now it's all about net zero and stuff like that. And it's, well, certainly in the last 20, 30 years probably, it's not brand new, but...
No, it's not brand new.
But it just sort of never really... tends to get massive traction in the end, does it? It doesn't happen, or it hasn't happened. Why do you think that is?
Because my theory behind that is it doesn't sort of match industry and big business aspirations. We live in a capitalist society generally, and You know, we have to make things and make them efficiently and all the rest of it. But I also think people haven't been impacted. The people that have been impacted by climate change around the world are mostly people who live in, you know, low-lying areas or poor areas of the world, Africa, you know, the Asian subcontinent and parts of that. And so it hasn't, you know, you haven't had water lapping up at your, you know, executive home in Chelford, St Giles, although you did last year. For many, you know, so people don't. It's something that's
not really feeling the
it's
pain
all
themselves.
At arm's length. But what's interesting is when I first got interested in it, we could have done something about it. We can't do anything about it. It's absolutely clear. We cannot do anything about it. We talk about net zero and all the rest of it. The climate is changing in a way. We're now talking about how do we mitigate climate change? How do we deal with the effects of climate change? How we know it's going to carry on raining, you know, because it's warmer and wetter. So we're going to be dealing with floods. You know, if you drive along the valley here, you just see the fields flooded. Farmers are struggling because their fields are flooded. Other parts of the world, we've had this event in Dubai, you know, an apocalyptic rainfall. And I was reading just this morning an article that was saying, is it the result of cloud seeding? You know, is it man's intervention again? But I think that the environment is on a track. You know, we're changing things because our environment is a balance. All of our oceans are connected. The currents in the oceans are like a giant treadmill. Yeah. And as the polar ice caps melt, you get more fresh water pushing the salt water down. It will alter, which is what's happening, the path of the jet stream, the temperature and the climate of all those areas as the thing gets moved further south, and that then impacts around the world. So that's what we're seeing. This is all stuff we knew about back then. You know, we knew that this would happen, but suddenly it's happening now. You know, if your house is flooded and your insurance premiums go up and whatever else happens as a consequence, you can't get food, it's impacting societies that were previously, you know, not impacted by it. And it will suddenly, I think, become something that there is no longer a choice about. We still can exercise choice. We should not be importing any fossil fuels from anywhere. You know, this country could be self-sufficient in renewable resources if the money was invested in it.
Yeah, I think that's a massive part of what does need to happen, actually. Although, in actual fact, personally, I think there's a much bigger problem, actually. This is what I believe, and it's really about greed and out of control capitalism and overconsumption. Yes, consumption. Well, that's what drives capitalism. We have to consume. We consume. You know. But we don't have to, do we?
We don't have to. No, we don't have to. But that will require political and societal shift, and that's a biggie. That's a real biggie. I think one of the things that ought to be thought about and perhaps insisted upon is that if you make something, you have a duty, an obligation and a responsibility to make it from something that can be reused. So, you know, you've heard of the circular economy. The circular economy is all about that. Well, that's the only way that can exist. I read a book by a guy called Amory Lovins way back in the 90s. He's from the Rocky Mountain Institute in Colorado, and he was a really out there hippie environmentalist. But he wrote this fantastic book which talked about circular economies, about the, you know, extracting things. And the other thing I think is we could say, well, let's not extract anything else from the planet. We've taken enough from it. Let's reuse what we've got. Yeah. You could mine landfill sites. Landfill sites will be full of precious metals. You know, all the stuff that was thrown into landfill sites. There's masses of stuff in landfill sites that could be the new mining, that we could repurpose or make into something else. So if you do something, you should be able to disassemble it and use it again. Or it's made of materials that are benign and can be, reused or recycled. And that's a very easy thing, but it doesn't, manufacturing would have to shift and adjust its thing. Wouldn't it be great if, when your washing machine or your, I don't know, whatever we have in our homes, your car, whatever, you could give back to the manufacturer and the manufacturer then has to disassemble it.
Well, look, it's even before that, what if washing machines were made like they probably were 30 years ago, where they're actually made to last rather than designed to pack up in 10 years, so you had to buy a new one, I mean, that's diabolical, isn't it, really? The fact that people are even allowed to
build in
obsolescence. Exactly.
That was a thing, wasn't it? Inbuilt obsolescence, that it would just pack up after a certain, so you would consume more and buy another thing. But those shifts those are all big societal shifts, and as I say, my fear is that we will be faced with absolutely significant events that we are not able to do anything about or anticipate, that will have bigger impacts on us.
But I think that in terms of those big societal shifts, that they're going to have to happen, because otherwise, whatever it is that's ultimately controlling the economy and business and corporatism and stuff like that, they're still focused on profit, and all that's happening now, even in terms of, I don't know what your view is on the ESG and stuff like that.
Profit's not a bad thing. I mean, you kind of need that to sort of focus people to make things efficiently.
But how much do you need? Do you need continual growth?
You just look at how much money is owned globally by 7 people or whatever it is. I mean, it's obscene. It's just obscene. It's just not. What is that about? Why do individuals need to have that much money? You can't do anything with it.
It's crazy now. The only good thing about having that much money is being able to give it all away and do lots of good things with it.
And some of them do. Some do. But it's the model that creates that. That needs to adapt and shift and change, I think.
Yeah, totally. And personally, I actually think it's got to come from the bottom up rather than the top down.
It will.
People have just got to do their own thing, really. You can't rely on, governments or really to make it happen. I think we've got to do it for ourselves.
But we are, I think we're due another social upheaval like we had back in the 60s and 70s, where people are saying, hang on, the world because back in the day, I was terrified the world would end through nuclear war, nuclear conflict. I remember, having conversations with my friends about it, saying, what are we going to do, when the apocalypse comes? Where are we going to what's happening to society? And we sort of, we did things we thought, well, it doesn't matter, we're all going to be blown to smithereens, soon, because there was the Cold War, the world was tense. And it's the same as it is now, in a way. But it's sort of, I remember really supporting the women of Greenham Common who, sat there for years to get the missiles removed, and they succeeded. Why should we have them on our in our countryside and on our land? So I think there needs to be another social kind of, movement that says, and I see bits of it happening where people are just saying, we're not accepting this anymore. We're just not. It's very hard to do, but, lots of people kind of need to sort of make that shift, and that's talk about the bottom up, generation up, and so on. And I think that's holding people to account. Very difficult with the politics that we have today, and people set net zero targets and then they abolish them. And Scotland's done it, and what's going on? It's just what's the, we need to have a much more, and I think it has to do with understanding and education and people being made aware of these things in a way that isn't alarmist or a way that isn't sort of saying, you should not do that. Those who are in a position of leadership, authority, control, if you like to put it like that, or, like I say, responsible for making things, need to have the responsibility to be looking at those. So people who are experiencing the consequences of that understand the principles behind what they're doing.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. So let's like bringing it back to property development. Building things in particular, because that's that's what I'm trying to change.
Making things, yes.
What do you? Well, actually, you told me previously a little story about you built a really interesting house, not far from here.
My house, yes. Yeah, that was interesting. Yes, I always had. I mean, most architects want to sort of, we're quite, vain creatures, and we want to build a house in our own image or whatever, and it's a valid thing to do. That's what you do. You build things, and you want to build a house. And for a long time, Jenny, my wife, and I had been looking to find somewhere to do this. I always wanted to sort of, because I'd spent most of my life in the city. I wanted to find somewhere quiet and tranquil in the middle of nowhere. And Jenny she's an occupational therapist, so she's really, really great with people and wants people around. So she quite sensibly said, we need to be in a community, not because I found a site in the middle of a forest which could have been off grid and all the rest of it. Yeah. Wonderful thing. So we looked for years and years and years and years and all the rest of it. And eventually, I remember one evening we had a search engine that was looking for property for us, and I'd click on it, and it was my birthday. We'd just come back from a meal. I clicked on it, and the parameters changed for some reason on the search. And I said, Jenny, what have you changed this? What have you done? She said, no, I haven't done anything. So suddenly, instead of pieces of land, it had properties, and the first one that was on the list was a house for sale in Old Amersham, next to somewhere that I had played cricket for 50 years, Barn Meadow, which is a wonderful, piece of public open space, but it's also a cricket ground. I'm keen cricketer, I've always been keen on sport and all the rest of it. So I said, oh, look, there's a bungalow here, and it's, it's in Old Amersham. I really want to live in Old Amersham, And I said, I'll tell you what, let's go and have a look at it. Anyway, we made an appointment to go and look at it. And the day we went to look at it, it was a day of heavy snow. And you couldn't get up the little lane that the house was located in. So we had to leave our car. We walked up the lane. It was very quiet, very peaceful, very tranquil. And it was charming. And it was a house, a bungalow that was being sold as part of a probate sale. So they were very keen to sell it. But there were a lot of people that were interested because it's next to a really good school, it's in Old Amersham and all the rest of it. So they went to sealed bids. I put in an offer, we put in an offer, and we won it. And it was on the basis that we could complete very quickly. And I had decided that we could use the site, demolish the bungalow, which was pretty old and it wasn't thermally efficient, and it wasn't in good condition. Yeah. It wouldn't have been possible really because of where it was located on the site. We went to Pizza Express, and I quickly did a little sketch of a house that would work on it. I still got it. And it's pretty much the house that we live in. And the good thing about it was that it was the best site that we'd seen for building a passive solar house. So a house that uses the sun in a clever way. Yeah. Winter, introducing it in winter and excluding it in summer. So it worked well. So we eventually bought it, and then, I went about designing the dream home, and you know, made a planning application to the wonderful planning authority, local planning authority, and there I had no objections from any residents in the lane, because I'd seen them all and talked to them all and shown them, and you know, got to know them a bit. In fact, I had 3 letters of support, but I had an objection from the town council and from one particular councillor, and if a councillor objects, it has to then go to the committee.
Yeah.
So I went to, there was a committee meeting, planning meeting on a Thursday evening. It was, when was it? 2000 and late 2012. And I took my youngest daughter, who was training to be an architect, Oxford Brookes, who's just come into her 3rd year. I said, come and see what, you know, after training to be an architect, you have to sort of engage with, because it's, you know, it's part of the process, the democratic process of the planning system that we have. So we went along, and my scheme came up, my house came up, and I was afforded 3 minutes to present it. And I said, this is a house that I've designed for my family. I'm very interested in sustainable design, and I grew up here. And I thought this would, you know, this would really wow them and convince them. Anyway.
So it's worth making a point before you go on, just for people. So, you know, you were not chopping down a load of trees.
No.
And trying to build 10-storey flats. You were just trying to do a really
I actually did a lot
house.
of research, and my house was made of flint and dark timber, a zinc roof that was capable of being recycled. They had solar cells for energy generation. I was harvesting rainwater, so there was no water going into the drainage system. I had a ground source heat pump. I've got bees. I've got a little beehive. That's not part of the planning application, but my little house 19B is where the bees live. Because of their, you know, pollinating abilities, and I had sustainable urban, all of those things.
Exactly. So the point is, you're doing a really well thought out thing.
Well
doing
thought
a really
out
good thing.
Yeah, really well thought
and
out.
everything the right way.
Everything the right way. Everything the way it should be. Anyway, the committee then weren't going to. They were just going to refuse it point blank. And they decided that they ought to have a conversation about it. So I went, oh, okay, let's talk about it, you know. So the planning committee members started off by saying, well, I'll start off, and I have to say this is possibly the ugliest house I've ever seen. I'll come over all Prince Charles. It's a carbuncle in Old Amersham. And if Mr. Richardson wants to build his house, I suggest he goes somewhere else. And you know, that sort of then set the tone for everybody else to follow. So eventually, they went to a vote. Said we better vote now, and they voted 12 votes against and 1 abstention. I think there was an abstention from a Lib Dem councillor who lived in Highgate or Hampstead or something and understood a little bit more about, you know, contemporary architecture and things like that. So it was thrown out, refused point blank, despite having letters of support, despite it having all of those credentials, and despite it having materials that are rooted in the area. So I was pretty disheartened, and you know, I was a bit glum, and I thought, what am I going to do? And I decided to lodge an appeal, and I thought, I've got nothing to lose, but it probably, you know, it's not going to.
Yeah. Now, before we get on to that, it's worth pointing out that is, you know, so at that time you'd had I don't know, 30 plus years of experience. You designed a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Everything you were doing, it was everything was done the right way.
Yeah.
And you effectively get a 12-0 vote against. And this is not uncommon. And I think, I want people to sort of understand some of the stuff that happens in the planning system. And remember, and it wasn't like some greedy, clueless developer that doesn't know what they're doing and they're just trying to pack too much on with a really rubbish scheme. In fact, it was the opposite, and you still get a 12-0. But the important thing, and this is what I want perhaps to get across, and what do you think with the typical knowledge and experience and training and understanding of either planning or design amongst that committee?
Well, I'll come on to that. The irony of this refusal is that it was the first time in my whole career I'd ever been refused planning permission for anything. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the problem with planning officers, I mean, they're underfunded. They don't have the money.
So hang on, before we go on, actually. So in terms of the planning recommendation, was that for approval or refusal from the planning officer?
It was for, I think it was for refusal.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was for refusal.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's worth, again, because this is meant to be a bit educational for people as well.
Yeah.
It's worth, you get with. I think there's about 330 different local planning authorities in the country, and amongst those, and obviously they change over time as politics changes. But you get ones that are much more pro-development, and anti-development.
Absolutely.
And here we are, or were, same local authority as your house, Chiltern District Council, have been historically very anti-development. It's all very nice around here, so they want change even less than lots of other places. And typically the committee members are fairly old, certainly, and stuck in their ways.
I could tell you a story. One of the committee members was asleep and had to be woken up.
There you are.
The guy next to her said, "Put your hand up now." So
it's important to people to understand.
I mean, everybody who...
These are the people making decisions on housing, ultimately.
Yeah, they are. Yes. I mean, it's democracy. It's what we live in a democratic world, and it's part of the thing. But the thing is that the Town and Country Planning Act was established, I think it was 1947, was established to promote development, to encourage development.
Absolutely.
Post-war, country was, destroyed and all the rest of it. We need to rebuild it. And, we went on to the Festival of Britain in the 50s and all of that stuff. But it was all about promoting development. Now what I fear is that we have a planning system that does the exact opposite. It's like a policeman. It sits in arbitration of, and judgment of what everybody puts before them. I've worked with some fantastic planning authorities.
Yeah,
mostly urban, you have to say. And people are really resistant to change. But the thing I struggle with is that they struggle with understanding what's good, because they base it upon their own particular interpretation of that, their personal preferences. There are lots of people that can help and assist. I mean, I could, sit and say, look, this is a fantastic development. This is a bit, come on, they could do better than that here. This is an important site, because they've done some pastiche, repro, Georgian type thing. Come on. There was I won't say the architect, but there was a building that went up in Old Amersham that was built for retirement. It was one of the retirement home providers. And it's a kind of reproduction of classical sort of pastiche. It sort of sits well, but it was a fantastic opportunity to do something that moves the agenda forward, like you've done here. I mean, there are so many ways of interpreting our history in a contemporary way that is so much more beautiful and exciting and relevant to contemporary life. That doesn't have to look ugly. It doesn't have to be bad, Yeah.
And I think that was the sort of point that I was getting onto, really. I actually think two things. Planning committees definitely need a lot more training, because I don't think many of them really understand how it all works and what it all means.
Yeah. I mean, my view is that I don't know. It's a bit like the jury system, isn't it? That somebody needs to guide them more than they have been, or that they're my evidence of them. And a lot of them are making decisions on the basis, like I say, of their own personal preferences and you know, peculiarities, whether they be political or or you know, aesthetic.
Yeah. And it's worth mentioning, and so in terms of the you know, if you are in a fairly anti-development local authority, as we are or were and you were, you know, that feeds through to all the planning officers as well. Irrespective of what's good design and what isn't, and what the policy actually says, they know that, like, well, this is going to get refused by the committee anyway. So that starts filtering through to them, and then they're also, well, let's just refuse everything, you know?
Yes. I mean, you know, absolutely right. It's very interesting because in my case, the house won an RIBA award. It was shortlisted for, you know, House of the Year on the Grand Designs programme that used to have the House of the Year. It's won a Chiltern Design Award. It's won all sorts of other awards, Blueprint Awards and so on and so forth. And it's now held up as an exemplar. And you know, it might never have happened. Yeah. So, you know, why does that happen? You know, what you have created here is absolutely fantastic.
Well, I'll tell you the story.
And I can understand why the planners would rail against it, because they don't see it, they don't understand it. Every single member of the planning committee ought to come to a scheme that they have given a hard time for or recommended for refusal, like this, like my house, and say, this is what you were going to refuse. Look at it. How it's inoffensive, it's beautiful, it does all the things that we would want a project to do.
Well, that is a plan here, just so you know. So I'm largely about trying to perhaps get a different message out there.
Yeah.
I want to get the planning committee here. I'm just waiting, you know, it's flowers are just coming out, so and we're pretty much finished. So that is a plan. So usual situation here. Chilterns, you know, got refused, but amazingly, we had the planning officer actually wanted to approve it. So she really liked the scheme. I shouldn't have too much information. Actually, I've said she now. Hopefully, I'm not going to get in trouble. Anyway, you know, liked the scheme. We'd done everything right. Really good proposal. And she was actually going to support it, which really surprised me, because I thought, well, look, we're not going to ever get anything in Chilterns other than by appeal. But anyway, she liked it. She was going to support it. Went to committee. In fact, when obviously upstairs for the sign off from the line manager or whatever, basically said, well, look, it's green belt, it's area of outstanding natural beauty. We can't be seen to be setting any type of precedent. The committee won't like it anyway. You've got to refuse it, even though it shouldn't have been refused. Yeah. So anyway, she refused it. Cut a very long story short, we win it, go to appeal, win it, and afterwards the planning officer said, it's a fantastic scheme.
It is.
I can't wait to see it built.
Absolutely.
Even though she got forced to refuse it.
But this is the obstruction. The problem as well, my refusal, it delayed me by a year, and of course prices go up and all the rest of it. I was disheartened. I cycled across America to raise money for a charity, which is another long story. But it was, you know, it was really, really disheartening, and you know, for no reason at all. And it's the same here, you know.
And the thing is, and again, you know, one of the things I'm trying to do is actually try to get the SME house building industry going again, you know, because there's just not enough small builders anymore because it's so difficult. And things like that, and God, I can tell you, people horror stories literally 100 times worse than all of that.
Absolutely.
That I've literally closed businesses, wiped people out based on bullshit and delays. That just there was no need for them to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, it's even worse in some of the metropolitan areas, the urban areas, because they take even longer to, you know. I mean, we're the only we're the only country that has this extended long planning process, you know. And part of the reason, certainly in the city, is that nobody really knows what the rules are. And if there was a spatial plan that said, right, this is London, this is a spatial plan, here you can go this high, here you can go that high, these are the densities, don't come back with anything else. Don't come back with, you know, that's what you can work within. That will establish the cost of, you know, the value of land. It will establish the parameters. You can deal with the process very quickly. You know, you can say, well, within those, it's relatively free to do what you like. You know, you can leave it empty, or you can, you know, do whatever. And that would suddenly, you know, because people go, I tell you what, you speak to a, let's push it to 30 stories. We might end up with 17. And you kind of think, okay, well, we'll go to 30 stories and we end up with 17. This is all a waste of time.
See,
but the developers know that the extra, you know, 13 floors are hugely valuable because they paid a lot for the land. There's loads of land. People are sitting on land. There's loads of brownfield land. There's plenty of land. There's loads of empty buildings. You know, we can deal with the homeless project and the housing problems exceptionally quickly if we were to shift the availability of, you know, property, land, and so on.
Well, it's planning.
And the planning process.
It's planning, isn't it? It's
process,
really interesting. Yeah. I mean, I've had this, you know, certainly developers and house builders don't really sit on land. I know people argue they do. They.
Well, you would know, Paul.
They don't, because it makes no sense. What you know, why, and all of this stuff about keeping the price up, honestly,
So are you saying that they don't to sort of bump up the value? They don't have land banks?
Well, what happens is no, honestly, they don't. They don't. Major house builders talk about, they have to talk about their land bank, like how many plots they've got under control. Yeah. Because, you know, the city needs to see that they've got a pipeline, and they're not going to be going down the pan next year because they've got no land.
Which is the share value,
but
isn't it?
Yeah, but the majority of that land is under option, and it's being promoted through the development planning process. So it's controlled. Most of it isn't, or a lot of it isn't owned, and it certainly isn't ripe with planning permission ready to go. Because you know how hard it is to get planning permission.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, but on big sites, you know, you could be spending 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 million quid to get planning.
Yeah.
I mean, so you don't spend. But let's just take a medium-sized, bigger developer site, 500 grand, $1 million quid. You don't spend that money to get planning, and all you know how long it can take you, and all the hassle to then just sit on it and not do anything.
Okay.
That's just not how it works, you know.
So can I ask you a question? This very interesting thing that's always interested me is that architects tend to be kind of not held in that high regard by a lot of developers. They're seen as a sort of means to an end, rather than people that can bring value to a thing. And architects all the time bring value. They bring added value, they bring all the rest of it. There are some great developers that are doing fantastic projects, you know, and value design, you know, and you go to, you know, you draw up a scheme, say, well, we're going to make this a sustainable, no, we can't afford that, or we want to, you know, introduce some biophilic design, we want to, you know, consult and do this and child, you know, blah, blah, blah. No, we don't want to do that. And I think it's a real shame, because I think if there was a more collaborative approach, architects wouldn't waste their time so much.
Yeah.
Because there's a huge amount, my profession wastes so much time getting nowhere. In fact, there's probably more hours spent doing things that lead to nowhere than doing things that lead somewhere.
I'll tell you
and
the
it's
answer.
A real shame.
It's a real shame. It is,
you know, you're a very kind of, you know, one of those people that are so passionate about what you want to do, and your agenda is absolutely spot on, and everything is really, really good, but you're not typical.
I'm not, but I'll tell you what happens, right? So about, you know, I grew up in a council house. So my mum was a seamstress.
You were lucky.
well, I was. When there used to be council houses.
I grew up in a tiled cottage.
When there used to be council houses. So my mum was a seamstress. My dad was a cleaner. So proper old school working class. We never had any money. I wasn't really very happy as a kid. It's a whole another big long story.
Okay.
But at some level, I thought. It's because we haven't got any money. If I make a load of money, then I'm going to be happy, right? So actually, in a very roundabout way, that is sort of one of the things that got me into property development.
Okay.
I won't bore you with the rest of the story, although it is quite interesting. But that's what got me into property development. Yeah. So and I was always very driven and very detailed. So I wanted to know all about it. I learned a lot about it and what have you. But I made quite a lot of money. Didn't get any happier, right? So started realising, well, shit. Well, that's not the answer, is it? So that set me off on a whole.
It doesn't bring you happiness.
Different journey. But I lost a load of money in the crash in 2008. That definitely didn't make me any happier either. And then, but I'd learned a lot. So and I like good architecture. I like design. I want to create more good quality housing and things like that. So and worse still, I really don't like bad design and bad buildings and arsehole developers because it gives us all a bad name, you know. So 10 years ago, I started up this little thing called Buildbank Land Academy to train other people, hopefully, how to do it the right way. Because what happens is people that either have got the wrong attitude, I'm talking about developers now, right? They've either got the wrong attitude or they just don't know what they're doing and they're not on it enough, or a combination of the both. They overpay for land because, you talked about it earlier actually, they overpay for land because they get all their numbers wrong because they don't know what they're doing. And then they get forced to try to either do too much with a bit of land, do the wrong thing, or very often they're in it and they're halfway through it, and then they realise they've got it wrong, and then they start dumbing it all down, cutting costs, shit materials, and something that could have been nice and is actually designed quite well turns to shit. So that's one of the things that happens. So they don't really know what they're doing. But the good ones that do, they sort of, you have to reverse engineer it and get it all right, get it correct from the beginning. So I don't know. So I guarantee you, sadly, we never worked together. But I think we met years ago. We talked earlier about, I'm pretty sure it was a site around Camden.
Might have been, yeah.
You didn't design the thing in Jamestown Road, did you? The old iceworks.
We did a project in Jamestown. Yeah, we did. It wasn't ever built. But we did look at a project there because there's a hotel there now. I think.
Yeah.
It's a cheap hotel, isn't it?
I think it might be Holiday Inn or something like that.
Yeah, it's one of those.
Anyway.
But yeah, we did a scheme for that. Yeah.
Anyway, so we looked at a scheme.
So that might have been.
It might have been that. Well, I ended up actually buying it and doing it if it was the same site. But we looked at something around Camden.
It was where they bring the ice in.
Yeah.
There was a big. Down the canal.
Exactly.
There was a massive ice store.
Exactly. It was a big underground, like a jar well. That's what they used to do. I don't know if people know. Yeah. It was. To be honest, I didn't actually know before that site. They used to go and get the ice from Norway or whatever, tow it over,
that's right,
tow it down the canal, and dump it in the way, and that's where the ice used to come from.
It's naturally refrigerated under there. There's no cooling; it's just stored there. Keeps it cool. Yeah, that site. Yeah, we did look at that site.
Anyway, I did it in the end. So I don't know if that, but it might not have been that. It might have been another one. Anyway, but the point is, I guarantee you. I can't guarantee you. I give architects a super detailed brief. It's not like, there's an OS. Well, I'd be interested to hear what you've had from, you've dealt with numerous developers.
I mean,
I'll give you the mix, the square footage, the size, the type of units, And then it's up to you to use all your flair and expertise to make it look great and make it work.
Yeah.
But I know what you know what it needs
you need
to be.
To put on it. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's just the quantum, isn't it? A lot of housing is about maths, really, at the end of the day, isn't it? It's about numbers and maths and all the rest of it. Now, that doesn't necessarily make good communities or good architecture. And sometimes you have to be adaptable, you have to adjust things, you know. And so I think that, you have to, what you have to do is you have to look at things in the round. So that gives you the basis upon which developer will say, like, this is what I need to put on there to make it work for me. And sometimes it's pushing it out a bit and sometimes it isn't. But there are many, many different ways of doing that. I put the question back to you. How do you then, you say, I don't like ugly buildings, I don't like bad architecture, I don't like this. How do you assess what you're getting back is good or not? Is it because of the reputation of the architect? I mean, I know you've done a scheme with Peter Barber, who's one of my, dear friends. He's a colleague, he's a professional colleague, but he's also a dear friend. And Peter has evolved an architectural approach to solving the most impossible sites
that
nobody would look at. And it's all down to sheer craftsmanship, his skill as an architect. His buildings, you like them or loathe them. I think they're all fantastic, It's a particular style. But his ability to sculpt in 3 dimensions homes for people on sites that would have been abandoned in terms of trying to do that. He's probably one of the most skillful architects operating in the world, if not, certainly in London, in terms of doing that.
He's fantastic.
Absolutely brilliant work. And his reputation and everything, he's won so many awards, deservedly so, because his buildings are about beauty, but they're also about the people who live there. He puts so much thought into the lives of people that live there.
And I'll give you the example.
That's the starting point.
Absolutely. So just to sort of square those two things together, because you're absolutely right. The issue, or the biggest issue for private developers is actually, of course, look, we're in a super risky business. It's high risk, high reward. You need to have a certain profit level to make it even worth your while, right?
Understood.
And valuers won't value it unless it's got a certain margin on it. Banks won't lend against it unless you're showing a certain profit margin and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the real issue is around land values and existing use values.
Right.
That is the key.
Okay.
So if you think about it, everything, well, unless it's a green field that's on the edge of town and it's a farm and it's worth 10 grand an acre, I mean, even that's got an existing use value, but it's very low existing use value. All of these brownfield sites, particularly if it's got building already on it or whatever it might be, it's worth something as it is. It's got an existing use value.
Yes.
Now, in order to be incentivised to sell, the landowners always want a premium over and above the existing use value, because if they don't get that, well, they'll just sit there and leave it as it is. So the existing use value plus a premium, and at the end of the day, look, I want to keep that a premium to a minimum, but landowners want it to be a maximum, and that's where the negotiation comes in. But ultimately, it's the existing use values plus the premium, which sort of sets the point at which you got a bit beat. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. They're just not going to sell. So it's not so much, developers being greedy, trying to squeeze too much out of everything, because of course they want to make as much money as possible, most of them anyway. I'm certainly not really focused just on the money, but it's the existing use value and landowners' expectations. That's the thing that really drives things. So when I say I come up with really detailed, I'm looking at the mix, the build cost, the unit numbers, the optimum type and size of square feet, to give to you or an architect, and that's what I did with Peter, for example. We'll come on to that. Because that's what it needs to be to get to the land value that's going to persuade the landowner to sell. And then I'll leave it to someone fantastic like Peter that says, look, I need this, that and the other, and he's the genius that will hopefully get it to work in a way that's brilliant for the people that have got to live there as well.
That's a really refreshing approach. I mean, that's really, good to hear. And of course, I've looked around what you've done here, and it's just jaw-droppingly amazing, I have to tell you. I mean, I've seen lots and lots of developments that are nowhere near this. This is special. It's special. It's a special place. You've worked very hard. So you've put your trust in something. You bought a piece of, derelict land, albeit in an area of outstanding natural beauty, which we've talked about the planners at Chiltern and the impediments, but you persevered and you've created something that is truly stunning.
Yeah, well, I hope so. But here's
it is truly stunning. I mean, it's not just the architecture, it's all the other things that you've thought about and all the other bits that you've considered. It's about the detail is exquisite, and the detail of thought that's gone into the whole place.
Yeah. Well, here's an interesting thing. So just in terms of planning, because obviously when you first saw it, you mentioned you could have built more on here, and you're right. So we've got three big houses. They're around 4,500 square feet, right? So they're big. They're
big houses.
They're very big houses. But it was the thing that swung us planning on this site, and it had a 35-year history of planning refusals before us. Was obviously an excellent architect, and the right and planning consultants, and exactly the right approach. Yeah. And even then, it was a massive battle. But we had to come up with something a little bit different and a bit clever, which ended up being. Because this site was covered in old buildings, you've seen what was on here before.
It's fantastic.
Was buildings that were sitting on the footprints of what were here before, and they're very similar volumes to the old farm buildings. So that's why they're all funny shapes and sizes and angles.
Well, that's a good thing. I mean, in the face of that, it's helped you create something rather special, I think, because you might not have done that had you had a blank canvas.
But the point is,
you're
right. You are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. Well, look, I like to think I would have done something a little bit.
Well, it would have been good, but what I'm saying is, what makes it special is perhaps part of the nod to the history of the site. I mean, I think that's important in some ways.
It is.
Because we need to sort of keep keep remembering, if we're going to work out where we're going, we've got to remember where we've been.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
Here's a question as well. Is it all right if I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
Because these are particular houses. Now, I imagine they will be quite expensive to buy, quite rightly so, because they're hugely valuable and worth it.
Yeah.
But when people are spending the sort of money that you would spend on a house like this, do you think, and this is to do with perception of what we think is beauty. Do you think somebody would want a more ostentatious house with a,
Do you know what?
Gates
That's a fantastic question.
Because that's what people associate with wealth and success. Not a respectful, beautiful, tranquil place such as you've created here.
Two things there. So, firstly, in terms of this, these are big houses, right? And they're definitely in the millions in terms of what they'll sell for. Yeah,
most houses are.
But in actual fact, if planning would have let me, or I thought I could have got planning any other way, I would have much rather built 20.
More affordable houses.
More affordable houses on this site. They still would have been fantastically designed and all the rest of it. And perhaps they would have been.
And it would have been a community.
400 or 500 grand each, or whatever it was, and a nice little community. So I would have much rather have done that, but planning wouldn't let me.
Yes.
So that's interesting. I don't really want to be selling 4 or 5 million quid houses to people, because that doesn't interest me.
No.
I'd much be rather building houses for people that really would need them.
But it's an opportunity, isn't it? And that was presented by a site like this with an authority and a planning environment that could be a little bit more visionary and say, okay, well, it's no longer a farm.
Yeah.
It's always had buildings on it, so it's not like an open field that we're going to interrupt views of the landscape with. Why can't we make a community? And people would then go, oh, it's overdevelopment and all the rest of it. And you can go, okay, well, let's try and find a balance. But you could then, you know, people could then afford it who are not having to make that decision. Do I have my, you know, my, whatever it is, big house with the gates and the pillars and the, you know, the things on top of the gate posts and, you know, the ionic columns and da-di-da-di-da, you know, that we all see as sort of the developers, the executive home.
Well, it's interesting. So to go back to your other question, you know, in fact, getting this thing funded, so borrowing money from the bank for this one wasn't that easy.
No, of course
because it was so
that's
unusual.
the other problem.
Because it was so unusual that, you know, it's not standard. It's like, oh well, what people we don't know. Anyway, we got it done in the end in terms of the funding, but you know.
So these are all interesting stories, you see, because I think a case study such as this is what we do need to change perceptions. So, you know, to show the planners, look, this place, they're really expensive houses, but we could have done so much more had you given us the opportunity. So I think that's an interesting lesson. To go to lenders who sit there and don't really get it, look at what, you know, what I've done and what I've achieved. These are absolutely important things. So it's important to sort of do that and to make people aware. Because you can easily go, oh, the planners were a pain, you know, I couldn't borrow money and all the rest of it. But actually these are lessons, these are salutary lessons to try and shift, which is what you're talking about, which is what you're trying to do, which I, you know, hugely applaud. I think it's magnificent. But, you know, you need to do that. You need to do that with something like this to show that it can be done. It's not a concern, but it's how do we promote the value of design? So, you know, lots of people know the cost of everything, but not the value of it. And that's, you know, that's well-known sort of saying that people come out with. But it's true, you know. How do you create something like this? And somebody who comes and walks into here has to see that they would be really serene and happy and peaceful to live here. Because you're not going to come in here and say, oh, it's got 6 bedrooms, you know, 3 masters and da-da-da-da-da and all that stuff, you know, and it's got a fantastic entrance hall and it's this, that. You know, the sort of things that people use to sort of, I suppose, to promote their success and standing. It's interesting what people use to show that they've been successful, and quite often, you know, they'll have the latest iPhone, they'll have the, you know, the most amazing cars and all the technology and all the rest of it, but the most old-fashioned house. You know.
Do you know what? So this is a really good question, and it comes back to your other thing about, you know, your typical house of this value around this neck of the woods. So, you know, you live close by, so you know exactly what it's like. You know, Amersham, Beaconsfield, Chalfont, Gerrard's Cross. It's all, you know, a bit sort of stockbroker, commute about, very, you know, quite wealthy. And the typical new build developers' houses, what I sort of call new, you know, sort of like footballers' houses type thing, big wide frontage and columns and all of that. Really not my cup of tea. But I would imagine, you know, 90% of people around here probably want that, because it's like it's like, look at how big my house is, look at me, I've made it, and all the rest of it.
Or is that all that they have a choice of?
That's a really good point.
Because I remember working with developers and trying to get them to shift away from the bog standard, you know, the Churchill and the Asquith, and the, you know, they're all given names, aren't they, that have an association with, you know, success and all the rest of it. And you'd say, well, can you just give us a parcel of land on this development that is of low value and let us build something? Quite often they'd say, they would say no. Oh, this is when we did the house for the future. Let's just build, and they say no, because, and they the thing that came back from them was our customers, clients as they call them now, whatever the current word for purchaser is, don't want that. What they want is what we give them. And it's a bit chicken and egg. What you give them, they have no choice about.
Yeah.
So therefore, it'd be an interesting thing, because there are other good pieces of architecture that are popping up around there. There was a beautiful house in Amersham on the hill that was designed by Cullinan Studio, which is fantastic.
How long ago? How recent is this?
It's built after my house, so it's in the last sort of 5 or 6 years. And it's a really contemporary home, but it sits in a street full of, the they're all slightly different architectural styles, but they're all very old. This is suddenly a contemporary building. And of course, Amersham's got this history of being associated with one of the most famous modernist buildings in the country, High and Over, and the Sun Houses.
I was going to say the Sun Houses. I know someone that used to have one of those. They're great, aren't they?
They're fantastic. Not very practical to live in, because they're very cold, and you can't. They're Grade 1 listed, rightly so, because they are iconic. But this is in the middle, of a very conservative, with a small C, area. This kind of like pioneering stuff that was built, before most of Amersham.
I was going to say, well, not only that, before the 1947 Town and Country Planning Act as well.
Yes, exactly. So,
which is, again, one of the problems. You try to do anything a bit too out of the ordinary, then that's, when you're, again, it's so tricky, isn't it? And that's part of the issue. There's so many people involved in the decision that you're trying to, spin plates and keep everyone happy. Yeah. And then you get some committee members that's like, well, I don't like that. Why is it not like everything else?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it really is
absolutely
tricky. But that's why, Peter's fantastic. Peter Barber, back to him, because, he's done such amazing stuff. I'd like to say he's definitely one of.
But what's interesting about Peter is that he's remained a very small practice.
Yeah.
I mean, he has sort of 6-7 people maximum.
Yeah.
And he never wanted to be big. He could be hugely successful commercially, but he doesn't want to, because he believes in the agenda of what he's doing, and quite rightly so.
Yeah.
And he's very much behind creating places that are socially and environmentally sustainable. And talk about environment in the context of the city, rather than sustainability as we know it. And it's fantastic, but he is having an influence, and I see other architects now are evolving a language and an approach that he has pioneered, and that's an important thing. And that's why I'm saying, when we have something that is successful against the odds, it changes perceptions. A lot of what Pete did was hard. People would find it difficult to accept back in the day, and now, I mean, it's fantastic. Everybody loves it, and for the right reasons. Yeah. Because they're humane places to live in. They're not, endless sort of rows of slab blocks and tower blocks. I mean, sometimes I despair at what I see coming out of some practices in the name of housing. And you sort of think, well, the only thing that defines how tall your building is how many floors you can get away with, and it could be this tall, it could be this tall, and you've chopped it up. There's no crafting of the language that is used to create the buildings. They're just like that. Yeah. They might be clad in brick, and they might be warehousey and all the rest of it, but they're still tower blocks. And
I do actually think generally it's getting a little bit better.
It is getting better, yes, of course. People are more discerning, and planning authorities are more discerning. Yeah, it is. But there's still a lot of stuff that isn't that good that's being created, places that, but what Pete does is he says, I can build you as many homes, but I don't have to build them all in a tower block with lots of useless space. I can use every bit of space. That's an interesting approach. They're dense. Pete's schemes are dense.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not sort of just, if you look at the density, they're as dense as some of those other schemes.
Yeah.
But every bit of space is given over to somebody to use for themselves. Terraces, and I mean, you know the stuff. So
anyway, so that's the way forward, or one of the ways forwards. Collaboration, I think, and good architecture.
Collaboration and recognising quality and value, I think, is important. And if you don't, people, like I say, we're talking about the planning committees and how they are trained or not trained to judge on what they're looking at. It used to be that in local authority planning departments, they'd have a design officer, they'd have all of those things, and they would make the sort of views of what is good design and not. They don't exist anymore.
Well, I mean that's an interesting one, isn't it? So I could go on a bit of a tangent there.
What about design officers?
Well, yeah.
I'm not saying they're good.
Half the time, failed architects that have never designed anything themselves in their lives.
I think you're right. That's true, but at least they existed.
Yeah. And they weren't all like that.
They weren't all like that. You could at least have a dialogue.
Yeah.
The LLDC, the London Legacy Development Corporation, are fantastic. They are really all over design. They are absolutely, and they've done, that kind of spatial thing that I was talking about. Then master plan, it establishes heights, and we did a couple of schemes there, great schemes, but they were in the parameter, and they were really on design quality and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
we tend to be talking about more sort of out of city centre places where it's harder to shift perceptions and the prejudice that exists, and that's what's important. Because I think there are people who are discerning and who will see the value in the sorts of architecture that we're talking about. Not everybody wants a executive home.
No.
It's interesting. There's lots of stuff written about the value of historic buildings and that they're imbued with the past, and that's why because we have a nostalgia for the past. That's why we tend to want to be within them. But you see, this isn't a modernist. It's a contemporary piece of architecture, but it's not modernist. It has pitches, it has angles, it has light, it has all sorts of things. It's not functional. It's a series of interconnected spaces that you link together to have different experiences within. You can make them what you want. So it's not just sort of the traditional modernist functional home. So all of the things that you might be looking for in a traditional building exist in a series of buildings like this. You just don't have them styled up with, Rococo wallpaper and whatever. It's clean white space, which is great. But you can come in here and you can make it what you want.
Yeah.
So I think it's great.
Yeah. So anyway, well, look, I obviously like these ones. Hopefully, I'll sell them.
And you will. There's no doubt about it.
So, well, look, thanks a lot for coming. I've got something really interesting. In fact, because I know you're not fully retired, are you?
No, not at all. I just, after so many years of being part of, leading and running and managing a practice, there's lots of aspects to business life that is it's not rewarding.
Yeah.
There are so many things that you have to be aware of. And I'm not saying they're not important, it's just that they're not something that I want to spend the rest of my life doing. So I've sort of re-engaged with almost the beginning, and I am my own, one-man practice called Bureau 19, which is, the German connection and the House 19. But I work with other people. I have people that I can call on to do whatever I need to do. I do a lot of mentoring, which is really rewarding. Helping people. Pete, I've helped over the years, and somebody else who came out of Pete's office, and so on and so forth. And so I do a lot of that, which is really really good. I didn't know
that. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll because obviously I've got a business that trains mainly SME developers and some of the bigger ones, but I actually want to expand that to actually doing some stuff for planning committees and planners and things like that, so they can all understand, so that'd be really good, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And I do a lot of awards judging as well, so that feeds into that whole, I see what's going on around around the world and in different parts of the UK and so on. And I'm working on homes for people who are passionate about good design and sustainability in its fullest sense.
Nice.
Not
and
just
is
can
that,
you put a couple of
typically
PVs.
One-off stuff or anything?
Yeah, typically one-off. I
Yeah.
mean, I've you looked at the client that I've got at the moment. It's got a plot of land, got a big site with, you know, reimagining his house, or his family house, and there's an area of land that probably not quite as big as this, but similar to look at doing something special with. But, you know, it's in AONB, the usual story. But we could do a wonderful little courtyard development that would work well.
Nice.
So yeah, so that's what
where,
I do.
So where would people get hold of you if they wanted to?
Well, they'd have to. I don't have a website. I have an Instagram page. LinkedIn probably is the best way of getting. I mean, I don't do that stuff because you have to keep, you know.
Yeah.
I fill my time with things that I really enjoy, so I'm not, you know, I don't need to.
I'm the same way. I'm not desperate. I have to go out there hunting for work, you know.
No, exactly. I mean, it's a nice position to be in. Of course, you know, if I was in a different position, I would be doing all of that. But my Instagram page
very
is
good.
probably.
So check you out on
LinkedIn, which
Okay,
is how we connected.
What's your name, your thing on the Instagram?
I think it's just Heinz 54.
All right. Anyway, they'll find you. All right. Well, look, I've actually
just Google Heinz. There's not many Heinzes in the world.
Yeah, I've actually got another really interesting little scheme actually that I'll talk to you about.
Okay.
I won't bore all the viewers and listeners. In fact, it might not bore them. They probably find it quite interesting. But we have been going on for a while, so I'll park that. Maybe we'll make that a part 2.
They're all asleep.
Okay. All right. Well, brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you for asking me to do this, and you know, seeing what you've created here, which is truly, truly wonderful, I have to say.
Okay.
You
Well,
know,
thanks.
And I don't say that lightly. It's amazing. It's fabulous.
Thank you. Anyway, it's been really interesting. So thanks for your time.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes and a much more beautiful world.